Hi, my name is Andrew Feinstein. I'm Executive Director of Shadow World Investigations in London. I'm an investigative author, a filmmaker, a campaigner, and perhaps most importantly, a father. Today on the show, Dov and I explore the leadership of Nelson Mandela, the corrupt, deadly global trade in weapons, criticizing Israel and its brutal occupation of the Palestinian territories as a Jew, and conspiracy theories.
Welcome back to part two of our delicious conversation with Andrew Feinstein. He is a former ANC MP who served under Nelson Mandela. He is the author and filmmaker and investigates the corrupt and deadly global arms trade. He is the author of The Shadow World Inside the Global Arms Trade, which has been made into an award-winning documentary. And we were finishing up in part one. We were talking about this idea where people were saying, well, how much money do the corrupt people need? And we're talking about, well, is it money or is it power? And if it's power, do they go to bed at night thinking, I was a douchebag today? Or do they think, oh, yeah, I'm just collecting more for the family? And I was asking the question, do they have the moral fiber? So I'm putting that now through to you, Andrew.
It's an incredibly interesting question, and I agree with you entirely. It's not about the money. While I was researching the Shadow World book, I discovered that Vladimir Putin at the time, and this is going back sort of mid-2011, so right, way out of date, these figures, was worth somewhere over $40 billion at this point, okay? So at the time...
When is this? I'm sorry, when did you say it was?
This is probably, the figures were probably correct for about mid-2011.
40 billion?
Yeah. So going back about 10 years.
Wow.
Okay. So no big deal happens in Russia, be it an arms deal, be it a natural gas deal, be it an oil deal, without Putin getting his cut. And part of the reason for that is he wants to remind the oligarchs who is boss.
Yeah.
And he's not just the boss politically, he's the boss economically as well.
Yeah.
And the oligarchs who try and cross him or who don't play the game, they discover their fate. I mean, Khodorkovsky sat in jail for however many years. Some of them get murdered in rural parts of the United Kingdom, etc., etc. Okay. So, is the money important to Putin? Of course not. It is part of the sense of self.
Yes.
And for a lot of these people, the only way they can define that sense of self is by constantly accumulating more and more, because that has become their currency of self-worth. Mm-hmm. However, when we say that, is there any desire on their part? Do they have any moral fiber? Do they have any desire to lead a good life? The question I would ask is, why do so many of them? Because what every arms dealer does, every successful arms dealer I've interviewed and come across over the years, they have a film made about themselves and about their great philanthropic work.
Really?
And I say to myself, oh, absolutely, absolutely. And, I can name you a South African arms dealer who's done it, a French arms dealer who's done it, a Swiss arms dealer who's done it. It just, it's extraordinary. And some of them are fiction, some of them are actual documentaries about these people. I mean, it's the most extraordinary thing. I was once asked to appear in one of them. They didn't realize my take on the arms trade and on the person they were making the film about. You won't be shocked to hear they never used the interview.
Really? I'm sure. I am sure.
But, it's like, why does a Bill Gates fund what was the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation? We're not quite sure what it's going to be called going forward. His wealth could increase by another $10 billion. Mm-hmm. That's not going to make any difference to him. Yes, no. It gives him his sense of self-worth, perhaps, but he is clearly seeking something else as well.
Yeah.
And, for those of us who sort of dabbled in psychology, there's this sort of very basic theory of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that the highest need that human beings have is for what Maslow described as self-actualization.
Yes.
For seeing oneself as making a positive difference in the world.
Yes.
And so I actually believe that if we forced it upon these people, if our media covered the reality of the good and bad of what they do, we would have far more of that self-awareness. But even without the media playing that important role, I believe there is a great deal of it. And the question that I ask myself constantly, because I have, for a variety of strange reasons, first in government, then in the private sector, in the financial sector, and then in the work that I do, I've rubbed shoulders with many very wealthy and very powerful people.
Yes.
And I always dress inappropriately for it, and they tell me that all of the time. And it amazes me how many of them want people to think that they are good people. Why do these people, why did they want to be seen with Nelson Mandela? Why was it important to them to be associated with people who are seen to be doing good in the world? Because ultimately, as human beings, I believe that that is a need. Look, when you're struggling on a daily basis to feed your family, to get a decent roof over your head, to have sufficient clothes, to get an education for your children, to have an okay paying job,
right,
you might not think about these things as much.
No.
When you are worth billions, when you do have a lot of time, be it on your private jet or between your mistress and your wife, in your limousine, when you are on your own and you don't have anyone to impress, what is really important then? And that, for me, is where we have gone so wrong, is that neoliberalism, in my opinion, which is a particular form, an extreme form of capitalism, has also completely usurped our values, which is why in the film of The Shadow World, which depending on where you live, you can often see online. It's also on Al Jazeera English on a regular basis. But in the film, we feature Milton Friedman.
Yes.
Who was the intellectual,
the godfather of neoliberalism.
The godfather of neoliberalism. And effectively, what Milton Friedman did is he created theories, some of the assumptions of which are deeply, deeply problematic. And I say that as a student of economics,
yes,
more than anything else, but that's a whole nother conversation. But he used these theories to effectively make us feel okay with greed and with being greedy. And he acknowledges it. He claimed that if we're all greedy in our own particular lives, we will get the optimal economic outcomes. I think we have seen over and over and over again how incredibly wrong that is. And I mean, we could sit here for days and I could cite examples of that. The reality is, though, that what is the most important thing to a human being? What do I tell my children? I want them to be happy.
Yes.
I want them to have a happy life. And I want them to be able to be happy without causing harm to anyone else.
Yeah.
And if they're enormously successful, and success, be it financial, intellectual, public service, whatever, if they are successful, you can be successful and lead a good life. There are two key ingredients. And this I was taught daily by Nelson Mandela when I had the privilege of working under him. The first is humility. If you knew that when I was working with him, which was from the early 1990s, he was probably the most famous person on the planet.
Yeah.
Never once did I see him act like that. And the way in which it manifested, which is for me, the second most important thing, was that he would respect every single person he came into contact with in exactly the same way as he would want to be respected.
Right.
And if you did not do that, he would take issue with you constantly. And there were extraordinary examples of this. A guy I worked as his economic advisor, a very senior politician in the country, who was really seen almost as Mandela's son, even though he wasn't. He'd been on Robben Island for 13 years, great looking guy, very charismatic. We were doing an election meeting before our first democratic elections in '94. This guy, who has since gone on to be a very successful businessman worth billions, arrives 45 minutes late for this meeting. Now, the ANC was known to not be a very punctual organization. Mandela had been there for 45 minutes. When this gentleman arrives, Mandela stands up in front of the sort of 500 odd people who are in what we used to call a people's forum. And as this guy's walking down between the people, greeting them all, they're singing and clapping. He's got a big smile on his face. And as he gets about 2 meters away from Mr. Mandela, because he wasn't president yet, Mandela says to him, "So your time is more valuable than the time of these people who've been waiting here for you for 45 minutes. You want these people to elect you to represent them, but you're so much more important than them. How can you represent them if you're so much more important with them?" And I saw this man literally shrink in front of us. And it was incredibly harsh by Mandela. But the reality was, if he saw a person, particularly a powerful person, disrespecting other human beings, he couldn't help himself but to put it right. And I think whatever you do or don't do in your life, to have humility about it and to treat all human beings with the same respect. And I think those two things, and it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. Neither of those things are easy. You know, that's not the way we are trained to live our lives. But they can make an enormous difference.
But as you said, you know, Freeman's work and neoliberalism, you know, for me, I've said this many times, you know, there's a speech in the movie Wall Street where Gordon Gekko talks about greed is good. You know, it is the basic speech of neoliberalism. And it was done as a commentary to how corrupt things were becoming back then. And now that speech is kind of held up as a good thing.
Yeah.
And really what I see it as, and I'm actually working on a piece around this, and I'm actually wanting to make a film about it, but which is the objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, is the destroyer of dignity in our world. That we have, Ayn Rand was a cult leader in my thinking. And I want to be clear. I want to be really clear for everybody. Again, I am a capitalist, not that kind, but I am a capitalist. And what's more, to be totally transparent, in the 30s, in my early 30s, in my 20s and early 30s, I thought Ayn Rand and Fountainhead and those books, Atlas Shrugged, were fantastic. And then with a little bit of maturity, I went, oh my God, this is ruthless, right? And what's more is, if you read the books, you notice that there's never a wavering. There's no humanity. It's absolute. It's this or it's that. That's not how people are. It's not how we deal with humans. So we've become we're all in this, fucking cult of objectivism under Ayn Rand that's pushed out as neoliberalism, that is stripping people of dignity. And so now it makes corruption okay. And it allows us to turn our blind eye to the fact that Yes, our GDP is good. Well, why? Because we sold arms to people who are bombing or killing innocent people. And by the way, if you read anything by David Corton, who has been our guest on Curiosity Bites, When Corporations Rule the World, if you read anything by John Perkins, who's also been on Curiosity Bites, who was the economic hitman, you really quickly discover, you got to take a deeper look at these things, and that GDP is a death economy.
I endorse everything you're saying. They're just two examples that, as you were talking, spring to mind. The first is generally around corruption. So, I left Parliament. I resigned the night before the ANC were going to force me out of Parliament because they refused to allow an unfettered investigation into a massively corrupt arms deal.
Right.
This young democracy that had gargantuan socioeconomic challenges when we took over in 1994, after 350 years of racism and subjugation, decides to spend $10 billion on weapons that we had absolutely no need of.
No.
Most of which have never, ever been used. And this was at the time when our then president, Thabo Mbeki, Nelson Mandela's successor, was saying we didn't have the finances to provide antiretrovirals to the 6 million South Africans living with HIV or AIDS at the time. A study at Harvard, very conservative study, concludes that over the following 5 years, that policy decision resulted in a minimum of 365,000 avoidable deaths of South African citizens.
How many?
365,000, and that's a very conservative figure.
Right.
It resulted in 32,000 babies every year in those 5 years being born HIV positive because we couldn't afford to provide mother-to-child transmission treatment for the mothers while we were affording $10 billion of weapons that we didn't need. Why did we buy the weapons? Because $350 million of bribes were being paid by the companies and governments behind those deals. The point I wanted to make is that Tony Blair, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at the time, makes 3 visits to South Africa specifically to get South Africa to buy a British jet trainer fighter plane. A plane that the head of the South African Air Force has said they do not want. They do not want. A plane that is more than double the cost of the plane that the Air Force actually wants, that meets its technical specifications and whose pilots could actually fly these planes, okay? At the time that Blair is doing this, and the British company paid 115 million pounds of bribes on that one contract, bribes that were negotiated during dinner on the Royal Yacht Britannia. While this is going on, Tony Blair has also established something called the Commission on Africa. And he announces with great fanfare that his Commission on Africa has concluded, astonishingly, that Africa requires better governance and less corruption. While Tony Blair is trumpeting the results of his Commission on Africa, he is not only persuading the South Africans of this corrupt arms deal, he is doing the same thing on behalf of the same British defense company in 7 other countries. So Britain and its defense companies are paying over £1 billion of bribes around the world while he is trumpeting that Africa needs better governance and less corruption. And the question I ask myself is, yes, the South Africans who accepted those bribes are corrupt and should go to jail.
Yes.
And I'm a witness in the trial of our former president, Jacob Zuma, in relation to those bribes. So there is a chance that he will go to jail. What about Tony Blair? What about the chief executive and chair of the British Defence Company that paid those bribes? So that's the one thing that so obviously occurs to me. It's just the rank hypocrisy. And then the second thing is, when we think that corruption is a victimless crime, let's think of those South Africans who were murdered by the greed of their political leaders, who were murdered by the greed of the British Prime Minister and his government, who were murdered by the greed of those defense companies. But it gets even worse. Let's look at the example. Greed is good. We will do whatever we can to maximize our profits. So, after the tragedy of 9/11, where thousands of innocent people lose their lives, an awful, awful tragedy perpetrated by 22 people, 19 of whom are Saudi citizens. What does the United States of America do in response? It invades Iraq and claims falsely that Saddam Hussein was in some way linked to Al-Qaeda. Saddam Hussein, who was a brutal tyrant, make no mistake, had absolutely no links to Islamic fundamentalism because they were a threat to his power base.
Yeah, he actually would have naturally turned against them because they would have been a direct threat to him having all the power he wanted and doing all the corruption he wanted to do.
And the person who is most pushing for that invasion is a man who happens to be sitting in the White House, the second most powerful man on the planet, called Dick Cheney.
Halliburton.
And the defense company of which he was chief executive before he became vice president, and in which he still has a huge shareholding, makes $39 billion out of the US decision to invade Iraq. So what are the consequences of that? Well, in addition to the consequences for those Americans who are having to use food banks to stay alive, those Americans who can't afford health care, in addition to them, over 1 million Iraqis have died since the invasion of their country in the conflict. But greed is good, because a few people, including the person who was most involved in ordering that invasion, wanted to maximize his and various defense contractors' profits. So, there are two slightly different examples of how greed kills.
Yeah.
And really, our responsibility as people who know about these things is to spread this information as widely as possible, as you are doing, so that it becomes more difficult for those who benefit from the greed to live their lives at least pretending that they're virtuous.
But you said, all of them want to be seen as good, right? George W. Bush was doing a victory tour after Donald Trump was elected. It's like, you love me now, don't you? But
yeah,
was still a war criminal by my count, anyway.
Absolutely.
And it's so they all want to be seen as good, and I can see that they are seen as good by some, and Donald Trump is, and at the same time, when you quote, tell the truth, you do the exposure, you bring the information to the surface, people like you and I are seen as tinfoil hat people, so Henry Kissinger is a war criminal. But if you ask the average American who may have heard of him, the average American hasn't heard of him, but the average, even somewhat politically aware individual, was Henry Kissinger a hero? The answer is absolutely yes. And he's a war criminal. I mean, he sent killing squads into South America, on behalf of Coca-Cola. I mean, just like the corruption is up the yin-yang. The amount of people who died under Kissinger's
genocide in Bangladesh in 1971. I mean,
right. It just goes on and on and on.
There's a very good book called The Trial of Henry Kissinger.
Yeah, well, Harper's did a piece on him, and it was that it was, you know, it was about him being a war criminal, and you know, and a lot of times these people are getting Nobel Peace Prizes. When Obama was elected, I will tell you that my wife and I cried. We were happy. Here's a man, you know, we had W, right? So
Yeah.
here's a man of color who is obviously articulate and intelligent. And I'm like, oh, you know, another Martin Luther King, who was my original inspiration at 10 years old as a Jewish boy
Me
in
too.
England. You too, right?
Yeah.
Jewish boy in England. I walked into the living room. My mom's crying. My mom, a Jewish woman in Lower Broughton in England, which is a ghetto area, and my mom's crying, and I go, "Why are you crying?" She goes, "He's dead." And I'm like looking at the telly. He's not a footy player. He's not on he's
Yeah.
not on Coronation Street. I don't know who he is. And then I listen. I have a dream, and I become inspired. And you know, I see that level of inspiration. I see that level of what America can be. And that's what made me fall in love with America. There's like, oh, you know, and yet people like I'm blown away by the lack of memory. I'm blown away by the whitewashing of history. And now it's coming up. So when you and I come forward with this information, we look like the tinfoil hat people who are saying, listen, this stuff is really twisted. Like the Citizens United is got nothing to do with citizens. It's got everything to do with corporations having votes. What do
Well,
you mean?
George Orwell called that doublespeak.
Yeah, exactly.
If you
And
call
it's
something
all
the
that.
opposite of what it means.
Right.
You know, the issue being named certain things. When I was living in South Africa as a young white person, I started working in Black African townships on the periphery of Cape Town, my hometown, where it was illegal to be in there,
Mm-hmm.
just as it was illegal for Black people to be in so-called white group areas
Yeah.
after a certain time when their jobs were over. And an uncle of mine called me a traitor, said to me, "What's the matter with you? Just be grateful it's the Schwartzes this time and not us. Are you on drugs?" And, you know, even in the 1994 election campaign, when I was campaigning for the ANC, on the doorstep, I mean, people would abuse me in the most horrible way. They would say things to me like, you know, the equivalent, there's an awful South African equivalent of the N-word, lover.
Yeah.
And they would say this to me all the time. You know, what's this? You've been involved with the ANC since your late teens. You're a traitor to the cause. And that's not the issue.
No.
The issue is base your beliefs on facts. And it's actually easier than one would imagine to interrogate what is factual, what is truthful, and what is not. There are very simple ways of doing it. My organization, for instance, runs an investigative training methods course where we've had prosecutors, auditor generals, activists and campaigners, journalists, an extraordinary range of people learning the techniques of how you investigate from basic to very complex matters and use facts. Don't hide behind what you want the facts to be,
Mm-hmm.
and be upfront about what information is based on, because that's the only way that we can create a more honest world. You know, this notion of fake news arose when Donald Trump was first elected.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, my goodness, is there anyone in the world who thinks that politicians don't lie? The only difference is there seem to be no consequences for that lying more recently, where we've seen Donald Trump tell blatant lies where everybody in front of him knows their lies and no one challenges them, where we've seen Boris Johnson and his predecessor Theresa May mislead, intentionally mislead the oldest democratic parliament in the world, no consequences.
No.
You know, 15, 20 years ago, those were all resignable offenses. So something is happening about the value systems of the world in which we live. And while we think we might benefit from that at the moment, if we happen to be part of the 1%, or we're in an advantageous position at the moment, it can very quickly turn around. And suddenly, when the lies are about you, it becomes more problematic. If you know there is a factual base to what you're saying and somebody calls you a variety of names, you simply have to respond with facts. Mm-hmm. And it's why I am open to debate with anyone on any of the issues that I talk about, because I can verify them and I can stand by anything that I will say or write publicly. And I think that's what we have to do. And I think we also have to understand that sometimes, you know, for instance, I'm often heavily criticized because I am Jewish, and I'm very proudly Jewish. My mother was a Holocaust survivor. She lost 39 members of her family in mainly Theresienstadt and Auschwitz. And that has been the Holocaust, although I quite clearly wasn't alive then, has been a really defining tragedy in human history in terms of my own life and my own politics. I discovered when I was elected to parliament in South Africa, the Holocaust had never been mentioned in the history of the South African parliament. Unsurprisingly, because after World War II, South Africa was run by neo-Nazis who started the system of apartheid, some of whom had been jailed during the Second World War for their Nazi sympathies. So one of the first things I did was I introduced a motion on Holocaust remembrance in the South African parliament. I then had the honor of lecturing at Auschwitz itself, for the Auschwitz Institute on genocide prevention. But the fact that I am critical of Israel and its occupation of the Palestinian territories and its role in the global arms trade, which is not only corrupt, but also pernicious and incredibly dangerous to the world, the number of Jewish people who call me a self-hating Jew is the favorite one, because they are the arbiter of how much any individual, be they Jewish or not, likes or dislikes themselves. I mean, that sort of pop psychology drives me mad at the best of time. I'm sometimes called an anti-Semite, which I find extraordinary, as though the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Israelis who are very critical of the Israeli state, the hundreds of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews living in Israel who are very critical of the Israeli state. So these are now all anti-Semites?
So I want to come back to that because we're at the end of this section, but I want to come back to that because this is an incredibly poignant and hot subject. You and I were talking about before we went to the air, which is a very fragile conversation, particularly for those of us who are by birth Jewish, who are now being seen as anti-Semitic because of criticism of Israel. So I want to come back to that and address that directly, particularly, again, not just as in pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, but also as in the context of corrupt arms deals and how it plays out into the work that you've been doing and all the investigation you've been through. So we're going to come back in just a moment. We'll just be one click away. Again, Andrew, please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you and how to tap into all of the resources that you have.
So you can see the various books I've written, the film that's been made of one of them, social media work that we've done at my organization's website. It's called shadowworldinvestigations.org, or just look up my name, Andrew Feinstein, on all of the usual social media.
All right. That's fantastic. I hope you're enjoying this delicious conversation as much as I am. And we're going to be back in just one click. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.